In the summer of 2007, the roar of Harley-Davidsons echoed across Taunton and Brockton, Massachusetts, as members of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club gathered in their chapter clubhouses. What they didn't know was that among them sat an infiltrator. They knew him as Scott Callaway, but in reality, he was FBI Special Agent Scott Payne, wired and living dangerously undercover. For more than 2 years, Payne navigated a treacherous double life, immersing himself in a violent world where brotherhood mixed with cocaine deals, gun trafficking, and bloody rivalries. On July 31, 2007, the operation he helped orchestrate erupted. The FBI and local police launched coordinated raids, seizing drugs, more than $100,000 in cash, and an arsenal of firearms. 15 Outlaws members and associates were arrested in Massachusetts, part of a sweeping crackdown the FBI called Operation Roadkill. It was not just another drug bust, but the culmination of one of the Boston Division's boldest undercover missions. A case that revealed how the Outlaws operated in New England and how close one agent had to come to death to bring them down. Payne's cover was carefully engineered. His Harley, his clothes, the bars he frequented, and even the accent he adopted were designed to make Scott Callaway seem authentic. He immersed himself in the culture until Callaway became a second skin. In New England, biker circles were notoriously suspicious, especially in Taunton and Brockton, where law enforcement heat was constant. To gain credibility, Payne had to project loyalty without ever appearing overeager, because eagerness was a red flag in biker culture. He bought drinks, told road stories, and stayed consistent until he was slowly accepted. Every handshake and every ride built credibility that moved him closer to incriminating evidence. The real test came when Payne crossed the line from outsider to hangaround, the first critical step toward being trusted. Outlaw clubs were paranoid and careful. New faces were scrutinized. Payne let curiosity build naturally, showing up consistently until doors opened. He was invited on rides, to clubhouses, and to small runs. Each moment was a test of loyalty, discipline, and toughness. Payne understood that undercover work required patience, so he allowed the club to lead, never pushing conversations or forcing deals. His backstory remained unshakably consistent. Eventually, he gained access to the sacred spaces of outlaw life, the clubhouses, where deals were discussed and plans made. Once inside, his mission shifted. It was no longer just about blending in. It was about gathering evidence the courts could not ignore. Operation Roadkill's objectives were clear: document drug trafficking, tie members to weapons deals, and seize evidence that could dismantle the network. Payne carried concealed recording devices, capturing hours of incriminating conversations about cocaine, marijuana, and firearms. The stakes rose sharply when guns were added to the mix, since firearms tied to drug trafficking elevated charges into federal felonies. When warrants allowed agents to raid the Taunton clubhouse, they seized weapons, drugs, cash, and documents linking members to crimes. Each piece of evidence strengthened the case, showing not just a social club, but a profitable, armed criminal enterprise. By midsummer 2007, authorities had enough to act. At dawn on July 31st, the FBI, state police, and local departments executed coordinated raids. 15 members and associates were taken into custody on charges of drug trafficking, weapons offenses, and conspiracy. The crackdown wasn't just about Massachusetts. It was part of a national DOJ strategy against the Outlaws, who were expanding aggressively into New England, threatening conflict with the Hells Angels. Cutting down the Taunton and Brockton chapters was a way to weaken their foothold before violence escalated further. The Outlaws, officially the American Outlaws Association, were founded in Illinois in 1935, predating even the Hells Angels. By the 2000s, they had become a powerful criminal organization involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and violent turf wars. Their motto, "God forgives, outlaws don't," reflected their ruthlessness. Massachusetts was contested ground, and Operation Roadkill became part of a broader federal push that in 2010 culminated in sweeping racketeering indictments against national leaders. Payne's undercover identity was designed with precision. Scott Callaway was a drifter from Texas, working a vaguely defined job as a site survey specialist, a role that explained why he had cash and moved frequently. This story gave Payne the flexibility to vanish when necessary. He gathered evidence carefully. Drugs were weighed, cataloged, and logged into reports. Weapons were traced by serial numbers, and charts mapping the club's hierarchy were built for juries. Payne's presence during transactions gave credibility to recordings and tied the evidence D. The undercover work paid off in court. On October 21, 2008, Timothy Sylvia, president of the Brockton chapter, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to distribute more than 5 kilograms of cocaine, a charge carrying a mandatory minimum of 10 years. He was sentenced to nearly 22 years in prison. Alongside him, associate Todd Denorio received 10 years. These convictions validated the undercover operation, showing that the outlaws in Massachusetts weren't just violent bikers, but central players in drug trafficking networks. Meanwhile, the outlaws faced mounting pressure nationally. On June 15, 2010, 27 leaders were indicted in Virginia under RICO statutes for racketeering, drug trafficking, and attempted murder. Federal raids in Massachusetts the same day linked local chapters to the larger national enterprise, proving that Operation Roadkill was part of a broader campaign to fracture the organization from both the street level and the leadership tier. The operation was not without risk. Payne later admitted his cover nearly collapsed several times. He was patted down for weapons, questioned about his past, and thrust into sudden tests designed to expose infiltrators. Any slip could have ended in violence. The atmosphere was unpredictable, with fights breaking out and loyalties tested through toughness. Payne had to balance showing grit without escalating bloodshed, enduring psychological strain that few outside law enforcement could imagine. What made Operation Roadkill successful was its precision. Prosecutors avoided sweeping indictments that risked overreach. Instead, they focused on provable crimes, drug buys on tape, weapons in hand, and cash in evidence. This tactical approach contrasted with failed biker mega cases elsewhere and ensured convictions. Ultimately, Operation Roadkill became more than a case. It became a blueprint. It showed how to penetrate a violent, secretive group through patience, authenticity, and discipline, then dismantle it piece by piece with evidence built from the inside. For Scott Payne, it was a career-defining mission. For the FBI, it was proof that even the most closed criminal organizations could be infiltrated and brought down. But the story of Operation Roadkill didn't end with the arrests and convictions. The ripples stretched far beyond Taunton and Brockton. For the outlaws, the crackdown was a devastating blow, stripping away leadership, scattering members, and leaving the chapters weakened. Rival gangs saw opportunity, but they also saw the cost of federal attention. The Hells Angels, the outlaws' historic rivals, quietly strengthened their own foothold in Massachusetts, expanding in areas where the outlaws had been pushed back. Law enforcement, meanwhile, treated roadkill as a case study. Training programs within the FBI began to use Payne's undercover work as an example of how patience, consistency, and authenticity could succeed where brute force surveillance had failed. For Payne, however, the story was more personal. The adrenaline of undercover life gave way to the weight of survival. He had lived 2 years under constant threat, and though his mission was complete, the psychological toll remained. Agents who go deep undercover often struggle to readjust. Relationships strain, paranoia lingers, and the line between the role they played and the life they returned to blurs. Payne himself admitted that walking away from Scott Callaway wasn't simple. He had become so immersed that shaking off the persona felt unnatural, like shedding a skin that had grown too familiar. In biker bars and highways, his face was still remembered. For his safety, Payne had to be cautious about where he went and who he trusted. Long after the operation was over, the Outlaws as an organization adapted. Like other outlaw motorcycle clubs, they absorbed the loss, recruited replacements, and shifted their tactics. New England remained contested ground, but the scars of roadkill stayed fresh. The club knew the FBI had managed to put a man inside their inner circle, and that knowledge bred paranoia. Membership screenings became harsher, and suspicion deepened. In outlaw culture, betrayal is unforgivable, and the knowledge that their brotherhood had been breached shook them at the core. Yet in a grim irony, the outlaws' paranoia also weakened them. Distrust made coordination harder, and new recruits were treated with such suspicion that growth slowed. Operation Roadkill showed us how one undercover agent brought down a deadly brotherhood. If you want more real crime stories like this, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts below. And make sure to subscribe, because the next story is even more unbelievable.